My name is Johanna Wagstaffe. I'm a meteorologist and an earth scientist. Every day, I see the effects of climate change through my work, a relentless cycle of extreme weather, terrifying storms, deadly heat domes, wildfires, droughts. But I remain in awe of the natural world and how it finds ways to adapt. And that's what we explore on Planet Wonder.
It seems that signs of runaway climate change are everywhere this summer.
The climate time bomb is ticking.
It will be too late.
Act now or face irreversible consequences.
When it comes to climate change, sometimes it can sound all doom and gloom, like there's no hope. But I also know the science says it's not too late to turn things around. So what do you all think? Can we do it? So this has me wondering, is talking about climate change making it worse? To understand what can motivate us to take climate action, we need to dive deep into the human brain. What is going on inside the brain that leads us to feel compelled to achieve something? What fires up human motivation? Well, scientists have known for a long time about the importance of the chemical dopamine. Many of us know it as the pleasure chemical, but in fact, it mainly sparks motivation. Dopamine helps to generate both positive and negative motivation. It transmits signals in response to rewards, but also to stress or aversion. So, if we could figure out how to create the right messaging around climate change that would make our brain release positive dopamine, then maybe more people would take action. Now, this is where behavioral psychology comes in. One of the most common methods of stimulating dopamine is through external motivation. You know, I will work extra hours to make extra money. The other way is intrinsic motivation, the enjoyment from the experience of that goal itself. I love working on Planet Wonder because I'm energized by the whole experience. That's true, by the way. So can we use these approaches to rewire the brains of the whole planet to make people want to slash greenhouse gas emissions? Because clearly, the way we talk about climate change now is not motivating most people to change their behavior. A recent Gallup World Risk poll found global concern over climate change actually fell 1.5% last year. To learn more about the power of language and messaging about climate action, we met up with behavioral psychologist Jiaying Zhao, who goes by JayZ, by the way. And what better place to start our journey than at Soaring Eagle Nature School? Basically, Planet Wonder goes to camp. Okay, JayZ, is talking about climate change actually making it worse?
Yes. How we talk about climate change matters. The way we talk about climate change right now is unfortunately not great for engaging people on this topic, because the current narrative on climate change is about doom and gloom. We're heading toward the climate catastrophe. The framing right now is very negative, and this negativity makes us feel anxious, depressed, withdrawn. So we're actually not effectively engaging with the topic.
What's the alternative? I mean, how do we shift to a positive messaging while still staying true to the dire science?
I think the alternative messaging is positive. We have to make it positive. The approach I'm advocating for is the happy climate approach. It's basically telling people the things we can do in our lives that not only reduce emissions, but also make us feel happier as a result. I think that reframing can get more people into the conversation of climate change and get people to take actions on climate change.
I need to learn more about this. What climate change messages are you hearing lately?
We are getting to a tipping point, and if we don't make serious global concerted changes, that we are going to hit a point of no return.
What we hear in the news, climate change causing this weather, climate change causing that weather.
As Canadians, we have to take care of our wildlife, right? So it's kind of like if we live here, then we gotta take care of this place we live in.
I guess I'm concerned about the flooding the one that happened last year in Abbotsford. So I do think about that quite a bit.
I feel like lots of people are like, well, if this is happening, we can't really do much to fix it, and they just push it off for future generations.
It is a total reframing because as a scientist, for so long, it's been about trying to get people to understand how serious the situation is. And do you think that's where we went wrong in the messaging?
Yeah, I think the doom and gloom narrative is too heavy. It's paralyzing. It makes us retreat and disengage. So the kind of the behavioral impact is actually the opposite of what we hope people would do. And this is where we need to turn the narrative into a positive frame. The other narrative is asking people to sacrifice, to give up, to reduce, to cut back. Basically, it's telling us to, no, you gotta give up your life to fight climate change. Things like drive less, eat less meat, fly less, shop less, waste less. You know, that's the kind of the personal sacrifice frame. It's also not great for behavior change, because that frame makes us feel shameful and guilty. If you tell me, no, you gotta drive less and eat less meat, my response would be, oh, I feel terrible. You know, I feel bad for what I'm doing right now. And these negative emotions like shame and guilt are not, again, conducive to behavior change. So for so many reasons, we need to shift the narrative around and turn climate change to something that's positive for people.
Positive storytelling has the potential to change minds. Just ask a PhD candidate. Grace Nozick, show me your laboratory.
We just saw a new United Nations report underscoring once again that we desperately need political will for urgent climate action. But how do you build political will? It's actually stories. The stories we tell one another, the stories we read and share on social media, and especially the stories we consume in the news. What we actually need is grounded hope, a sense of agency, goals, a pathway, being able to see your fellow peers and citizens taking effective action on climate change in community as a collective. And what we also need to recognize is that these stories are not happening in a vacuum. I've spent the last 7 years studying how the fossil fuel industry has used so many different tactics to undermine political will through story. The other thing we really need to recognize is that our youth are disproportionately hearing these stories of apocalypse and doomism. We have this new study coming out in The Lancet showing that the youth in Canada and around the world are really being hit by this tidal wave of eco and climate anxiety. And we owe them stories of grounded hope for climate justice and climate action.
The words we use really, really do matter.
They do. Let me give you an example. Instead of saying drive less, we should say drive more people.
I see what you did there.
Why is that important? One, you're driving more people who would otherwise be driving by themselves. So you're saving the emissions by carpooling. Second, social connections. Hanging out with friends and family in the car actually can make you feel happier, because social interactions is the #1 predictor of happiness around the world.
And it doesn't make it sound like you're being told to not do something.
It's not to say don't drive or drive less. No, drive as much as you want, but drive other people with you.
Do you have any other examples of sort of that reframing of words?
Yeah, so instead of saying eat less meat, because that's a sacrificial frame, say eat more plants. Because plants are great for our body, our mind. It's plants, vegetables. Don't say don't eat meat, but yeah, eat meat, but make it a treat.
It's a treat. It's a special occasion.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So you can enjoy it more. So that's the kind of the principle of happiness is abundance reduces appreciation. Instead, we should make those, let's say, high emission items, foods or activities a treat.
This really applies to me. I need to reframe my nightly Toblerone. That idea of reframing language is something the city of Vancouver is working on when it comes to development. When an Indigenous approach is taken, it's not just about building, it's about centering the language around how the land used to be before colonization. Corey Douglas is doing just that.
Can you tell me more about your role as cultural advisor with the City of Vancouver for their sea level rise project?
I mean, if you look at the urban fabric of a city, nature is basically, it's not directly associated with any kind of urban fabric and or design. So what we wanted to do is ensure through our design analysis was reestablish that relationship between the Indigenous communities, being Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and repair that relationship between Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh and nature.
At the end of the day, do you hope that overall, everyone who works and plays on this unceded land will be using words like accommodate versus retreat?
And I think it really comes down to understanding and appreciating pre-contact history and those relationships even from Indigenous community to Indigenous community, and how complex those relationships were, how the land had actually supported the Indigenous people and how it isn't today. How can we, as an industry, understand and appreciate and repair that relationship? Indigenous engagement comes in various ways. Like, there are so many complex ways to engage an Indigenous community. We want the entire project to be injected with a cultural identity.
How does that apply both to individuals having conversations about this and sort of the messaging that we're getting?
The messaging matters as well. So not just the words we use, but the kind of messages we use. So one example is actually carbon tax is negative because nobody likes tax. So actually in a study done back in 2019, consumers like carbon offsets way more than carbon tax, even though it's effectively the same thing. So they prefer to fly or to purchase items with carbon offsets on it, and they are willing to pay more for it as opposed to paying carbon tax as a result. So for people who are concerned about climate change, yes, the environmental frame, the health frame is effective. But for conservative individuals, for people who are skeptical or are doubtful of the human contributions to climate change, that messaging doesn't work. Instead, we should use other kinds of messaging, like saying that climate change poses a national security threat. So messaging that resonates with conservative values on security, protecting our families, protecting our homes, and also making renewable energy, the climate actions as boosting economic and technological development. So those narratives or messages actually resonate a lot with conservatives. That will make them take actions and care about climate change more.
But what about the children? Stay tuned.
How should we be talking to these kids about climate change?
So we need to turn their hopelessness, despair, anxiety into optimism and actual hope and action. I think we should tell them what they can do and tell them that their actions do matter. They're not just helpless beings in the world. They're agents of change.
So Cass, how do we talk to kids about climate change?
I think what we focus on here at Soaring Eagle is not overwhelming the kids with large terms that are hard to wrap their heads around or really big issues that feel overwhelming and anxiety-inducing. We tend to focus on action. So what can we do? We empower the kids to think deeper about the world that they're living in, that they're going to be living in, and being the future leaders of. So we break down those terms by doing different projects and sort of giving that action piece to the kids. So we want to hear their ideas.
What does having the kids outside do for getting them more interested in caring for the environment?
When they are connected to a place, they're more likely to care about it.
Are you noticing examples where specific words really matter in their engagement?
With big words, I find the kids sort of have a hard time grasping it. So with sustainability, for example, we just did this big project where they created their own sustainable city. So instead of saying, okay, these are the bad things about cities, these are the good things, it was like, here's Vancouver. What's working, what's not? And then they all had a different sector in that project, and they were able to think about sustainable alternatives without us telling them that they were sustainable. We also spend a lot of time telling stories, so oral stories or reading stories, and we find that a lot of Indigenous authors, like local or Canadian, there's so many good stories that the kids are just entranced by, and they weave together all of the Western kind of science knowledge that we're doing, but also their own perspective of nature on this land here.
Hold that thought. How's my pace? Am I gonna get everything done today? Ooh, that truck is loud. What else is going on today? Does that person recognize me? I should smell first. Oh, I love that scarf. Ooh, do I want sushi for lunch?
Does this sound like your brain at all? Please tell me it's not just my brain. Taking a walk in the city isn't exactly relaxing. Stimulating, yes, but not relaxing. Your brain is just being pulled in so many different directions. It actually impacts the way that your brain handles stress. In fact, a 2011 study found that the amygdala, that's the danger sensing part of your brain, was overactive for people living in the city in stressful situations. So if this is your brain in the city, and now here's your brain on nature. Simply put, the brain is just better equipped to handle a natural setting, and it gives our attention a break too. Studies show that nature not only decreases negative emotions, but increases the positive ones. Most other stimuli only do one or the other. And you don't need a ton of time to get the benefits. Latest research shows 5 to 10 minutes a day versus saving a huge chunk of time for the weekend. It's hard to pinpoint specifically what's making our brains respond to nature this way because there are so many good layers. The oxygen, the better air quality, the physical fitness. But at the end of the day, if you're able to find a vista or even a city park, think about giving your attention a breath of fresh air. So JayZ, what does the science say about what behavior interventions actually work?
So the most effective behavioral intervention is the ones that make things easy for us. So make it easy. Let me give you an example. Defaults turn out to have the most impact on human behavior. So by that I mean, what is a default? We tend to go with the status quo.
Right. So if you can make your status quo the environmentally conscious or sustainable option.
My example is I've set up my life, my weekly routine to be as low carbon as possible. So for instance, my default of driving is I only drive 2 days a week.
That's the default?
That's my default. Tuesdays and Thursdays, because those are the days I teach. Other days, I will do Zoom meetings, I will do in-person meetings around home. I will not drive. Another example is, pick one day of the week that you go plant-based in terms of food. Let's say Mondays is when we go plant-based, but you can eat meat other days. That's another default that families can have.
These are great examples that, individuals can add in. How hard is it to change your default, though?
That takes some effort to shift your status quo. I think having friends, having family support helps. Telling people that this is what I'm going to do going forward. Put it on your calendar. Have a reminder to change that default helps. I think having social support really matters here.
Now, I've just loved learning about the world of behavioral science. What other interventions are part of behavioral science and can be used in this initiative?
Another intervention is prompts. So that's kind of messaging, but it can be a signage, it can be a poster. Let me give you an example. We don't know the downstream consequences of our actions. So every time I throw away a plastic bottle, I don't know where it goes, but it ends up hurting some marine animals down the line, let's say. But people are not aware of those downstream consequences.
And wouldn't you know it, JayZ has just published a study on this very concept.
Growing up, shopping for produce went hand in hand with these see-through plastic bags, maybe a twist tie, trying to figure out which end was the open end. But it turns out that has become an ingrained but unnecessary shopping habit. Experts say the skin on fruits and vegetables is tough enough that as long as you give it a wash when you get home, you don't need that plastic that ultimately ends up in our oceans. The new UBC study wanted to see how easy it would be to break that habit using 12 different behavioral interventions. Everything from showing a picture of a turtle with a bag on its head to reward interventions. So offering to donate to an ocean conservation group if you don't choose plastic. Now this was done during the pandemic, so it was all online shopping, but every single intervention method resulted in a reduction of people choosing plastic when compared to the control group. The biggest turnaround was from the reward category. So 50% of people chose not to use plastic when a reward like a donation was offered. The study showed that habits can be broken, and hopefully one day choosing plastic will just feel weird. Bringing your own reusable shopping bags is the only option. Can we place visual cues in our own life?
Yes, we can. We can put that in our kitchen near the garbage bin, in our laundry machines. Actually, we're running that study with BC Hydro right now, where we put turtles. It's a sticker that you can put up on your dryer and washer. The idea is when you can choose what to wash and how often you wash your clothes, because every rinse cycle, every wash cycle sheds tons of microplastics into the water stream, and that's bad for the water. So that's a prompt that we're actively testing at this moment.
Words really do matter, like the literal words, the individual letters.
How's it tasting there, Joe?
Oh, so good. How does this whole conversation about words and climate change apply to individuals when it comes to vulnerability versus privilege?
There's actually a huge carbon inequality in the world. The bottom 50% of the world population only emit 10% of the global greenhouse gases. The top 10% of the world population emit 50% of the world's greenhouse gases. That's enormous disparity. And what this means is that for the vulnerable populations, people who are low income, who don't have the resources, we cannot just ask them to cut back and reduce further because their footprint is already low, and we actually need to support them to adapt to climate change.
We've seen that even here in Vancouver.
Absolutely. Take the poorest neighborhood in Vancouver, downtown East Side. They are the most vulnerable to flooding, and they don't have places to go. They don't have the infrastructure, the equipment to protect their home, where they live, their livelihood. So what we need is governments and society to actually support these communities and populations to adapt to extreme weather events as they become more frequent now.
Through your research and with what you're seeing, do you think changing the way and the words we use to talk about climate change can make the difference?
That can. I think changing how we describe climate change, changing the things we can do at a personal level to address climate change can help us get there. It's not the whole picture, but it can change the public narrative on climate action. It can instigate collective action on climate change. So that's what I'm hopeful about.
I'm hopeful too. Seeing these kids helps too.
Yeah. That's our future.
Thank you. So it turns out words really do matter, especially when it comes to the fight against climate change. And the science shows us it's not too late to change our behaviors and make a difference. And according to the Vancouver local youth climate group, the Rootbound Collective, we need climate storytelling with justice, hope, community, and system change. Do you think we're going to be able to save planet Earth from getting too hot?
Yes.
You do?
Uh-huh.
What do you think we can do to stop it?
Make it more rainy and more snowy so in the hot heat wave doesn't come back in.
That's the tsunami?
Yeah.
And that's the fire?
Yeah, and that's the fire, and then it's putting it out.
So are you saying you took something negative and turned it into a positive?
Yeah, so the tsunami could actually put out the fire.
That's a really positive solution.